Coordinator Thresha's ship launched from Concordia Prime at maximum speed, followed by 3 escort vessels carrying the rest of the Valkyrie delegation. They were heading for the nearest jump point, where they could escape into hyperspace and disappear into Valkyrie territory. Once there, they would be beyond the reach of Council Justice. Admiral Grace Holloway watched their flight path from the bridge of her flagship, the Resolute. Her task force had been waiting at a safe distance from the station, ready for exactly this situation. Now she gave the order to intercept. All ships moved to block the jump point. Weapons to ready status. We are not firing first, but we will not let them escape. The human fleet accelerated toward the fleeing Valkyrie vessels. At the same time, another group of ships emerged from behind Concordia Prime, Dravosi warships, led by Commander Kethral, the same officer who had lost family members in the attack on the research outpost. He had demanded the right to participate in the pursuit. Human vessels, this is Commander Kethral. The Dravosi officer's voice came through the communication channel. We are joining your formation. The ones responsible for murdering our people will face justice today. Holloway allowed herself a small smile. 3 weeks ago, the Dravosi had been ready to go to war with humanity. Now they were flying side by side against a common enemy. The galaxy was indeed full of surprises. Thresha's ship detected the approaching forces and changed course. But it was too late. The combined fleet had cut off every possible escape route. The Valkyrie vessels were surrounded. Coordinator Threshan, Holloway broadcast on an open channel. You are ordered to power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. If you attempt to flee or resist, we will use force. For a long moment, there was no response. Then Threshan's voice came through, filled with cold fury. You cannot do this. I am a member of the Security Directorate. I have diplomatic immunity. Your immunity was suspended by High Arbiter Voshkith the moment you fled the Assembly, Holloway replied. You are now wanted for conspiracy against galactic peace. Surrender or face the consequences. Another silence. Then, one by one, the Valkyrie escort vessels began powering down their weapons. Their captains had decided that loyalty to Threshan was not worth dying for. Only his personal ship continued to resist. Commander Kethral moved his flagship directly into Threshan's path. I lost 47 of my people because of your scheme, the Dravosi growled. Scientists, researchers, they had no part in your political games, but you killed them anyway. If you think I will let you escape, you are a fool. Threshan's ship fired a single desperate shot at the Dravosi vessel. The blast splashed harmlessly against the warship's shields. Kethral did not even flinch. That was a mistake, he said. The combined fleet opened fire, targeting only the Valkyrie ship's engines and weapons systems. Within minutes, the vessel was dead in space, drifting helplessly between the warships that surrounded it. Boarding parties from both human and Dravosi ships entered simultaneously. They found Threshan in his private quarters, attempting to destroy records that would have provided even more evidence of his crimes. He was taken into custody without further resistance. 3 days later, the Grand Assembly reconvened. The chamber had been repaired, the damaged seats replaced, and every delegation was present. But the atmosphere was different now. The suspicion and hostility that had filled the room during Daniel Carter's last appearance had been replaced by something else. Something that looked almost like respect. High Arbiter Voshkith called the session to order and began reading the findings of the investigation. The evidence against the Valkyrie Confederation was overwhelming. Financial records confirmed payments to the Vul Syndicate. Communication logs showed direct orders from high-ranking Valkyrie officials. And Threshan himself, facing the prospect of life imprisonment, had begun to cooperate with investigators in exchange for leniency. The full scope of the conspiracy was even larger than anyone had imagined. The Valkyrie had spent decades preparing for this moment, positioning themselves to take advantage of a war between humans and Dravosi. They had bribed officials, planted agents, and manipulated events throughout the galaxy. Only the determination of a few individuals had prevented their plan from succeeding. When Vashkith finished reading the report, Commander Verthax rose from his seat. The massive Dravosi walked slowly to the central podium, his movements heavy with the weight of what he was about to say. "I owe the human delegation an apology," he said. His voice was rough, as if the words were difficult to form. "I came to this council demanding justice, and in my anger, I refused to consider that we might have been deceived. I accused innocent people of crimes they did not commit. I am sorry." Daniel Carter stood and walked to meet him. The two men faced each other in the center of the chamber, representatives of species that had nearly gone to war. "We accept your apology," Daniel said, "and we offer one of our own. In our anger at being falsely accused, we walked out of this assembly. We let our pride override our commitment to galactic peace. That was wrong." Verthax extended his clawed hand. Daniel took it without hesitation. The chamber erupted in applause. For the first time in weeks, the representatives of 47 species were united in something other than fear or anger. "Hi," Arbiter Vashkith called for silence. "There is one more matter to address," he announced. "In light of recent events, the Council has voted to offer humanity a seat on the Security Directorate. This is a position of great responsibility and trust. Ambassador Carter, will Earth accept?" Daniel looked back at Lisa Monroe, who nodded with tears in her eyes. He turned to face the assembly. "We accept," he said, "and we promise to use this position not for power, but for peace. We walked out of this assembly because we refuse to accept injustice. We return to it with the same commitment. As long as humanity has a voice in this council, we will speak for those who cannot speak for themselves." The applause was even louder this time. Later that evening, Daniel stood on the observation deck of Concordia Prime, looking out at the stars. Lisa stood beside him, holding 2 glasses of something that passed for wine among the station's diverse population. "We came close to disaster," she said quietly. "One wrong move and the whole galaxy would have gone to war. But it did not," Daniel replied, "because people chose to search for the truth instead of accepting easy answers. Because our enemies made the mistake of underestimating what humanity would do when pushed against a wall." Lisa handed him a glass. "What do you think happens now?" Daniel took a sip and considered the question. "Now we build something better. We have allies we did not have before. We have a seat at the table where real decisions are made. And we have proven something important. What is that?" Daniel smiled and raised his glass toward the stars. "That when humans storm out of the assembly, the galaxy should pay attention, because we always come back." Lisa laughed and raised her own glass. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the endless sea of stars that stretched before them. The galaxy had watched in terror when humans stormed out. Now it watched in hope as they chose to stay. And somewhere out there, among those countless points of light, a new chapter in galactic history was beginning. The debris field stretched across thousands of kilometers of empty space. Twisted metal and shattered equipment floated in silence, the remains of what had once been a thriving research station. Captain Kevin Park guided his ship through the wreckage slowly, scanning everything his sensors could reach. His team worked in shifts, collecting samples and recording data. After 2 days of careful investigation, they had gathered enough evidence to confirm what Kevin had suspected from the beginning. "The hull fragments are real," Maya Chun Williams reported. She was a civilian engineer recruited for her expertise in alien technology, a small woman with sharp eyes and grease-stained hands. "They definitely came from human ships. But look at this." She pulled up a chemical analysis on the main screen. The metal fragments contained trace elements that matched human manufacturing, but the welding patterns were wrong. Human shipyards used automated systems that left a specific signature on every joint. These fragments showed manual welding, the kind done by hand in small workshops. Someone built these pieces to look like human debris, Maya explained. They used our materials, but they did not have access to our manufacturing equipment. Kevin nodded slowly. What about the ship signatures? That is where it gets interesting. Maya switched to another display showing energy readings from the attack site. I found traces of a third party. These engine residues do not match human or Dravosi technology. The fuel mixture is unique. She highlighted a series of data points that formed a pattern Kevin had never seen before. I ran this through every database we have access to. It took 18 hours, but I finally got a match. Maya's voice dropped lower, as if she was afraid someone might hear. Vool Syndicate. Kevin felt cold spread through his chest. The Vool Syndicate had been a criminal organization that operated in the shadows of galactic society, dealing in weapons, information, and murder. They had been destroyed over 40 years ago in a coordinated strike by multiple species. Or so everyone believed. Are you certain? The match is 97%. Either the syndicate survived, or someone is using their old technology. Kevin immediately sent an encrypted message to Admiral Holloway, reporting their findings. The response came back within hours. Continue investigating. Find out who hired the syndicate. The trail led to a remote trading hub in unclaimed space, a place called Nexus Station. It was a lawless outpost where criminals, smugglers, and information dealers gathered to conduct business away from the eyes of any government. Kevin's ship docked at the station's outer ring, and he went aboard alone, wearing civilian clothes and carrying no identification. The interior of Nexus Station was dark and crowded. Beings of every species filled the corridors, conducting transactions in whispered voices. Kevin made his way through the crowds until he reached a bar at the station's center. There, sitting at a corner table, was the contact he had been told to find. The broker was a mystery. No one knew what species the broker belonged to. The figure wore heavy robes that concealed every part of its body, and its voice came through a mechanical translator that stripped away any identifying features. It was said that the broker knew everything that happened in the shadows of the galaxy. If anyone could identify who had hired the Vool Syndicate, it was this being. Captain Park, the broker said as Kevin sat down. I wondered when you would come. You know who I am? I know many things. That is why you are here. The broker gestured with a gloved hand that might have had 5 fingers or might have had 7. You want to know who paid the syndicate to frame your people. Kevin leaned forward. Do you have that information? I do. But such knowledge comes at a price. Name it. The broker was silent for a moment. When it spoke again, the mechanical voice carried something that might have been amusement. I will tell you what I know, Captain, because the ones who hired the syndicate have become a threat to my business as well. When powers try to start wars, it disrupts the careful balance that allows me to operate. I have no love for your species, but I have even less love for those who would burn down the galaxy for their own profit. The broker reached into its robes and produced a small data chip. The attack on the Dravosi outpost was funded through a series of hidden accounts. I traced those accounts to their source. The money came from the Velthari Confederation. Kevin took the chip carefully. The Velthari? They are members of the Council. They have no quarrel with humanity. They have no open quarrel, the broker corrected. But the Velthari have long desired to expand their territory. Human space and Dravosi space both border their own. A war between your peoples would weaken both of you, leaving rich planets ripe for conquest. Before Kevin could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. The broker's head turned toward the sound. It seems we are out of time, the broker said. Someone does not want this information to reach your people. Kevin looked toward the bar's entrance and saw figures in black armor pushing through the crowds. They moved with military precision, scanning every face, and they were heading directly toward him. "Go," the broker said. "Use the service corridors. My people will delay them." Kevin did not argue. He slipped through a hidden door behind the bar and ran through narrow passageways that smelled of rust and recycled air. Behind him, he heard shouting and the sound of weapons fire. The broker's people were buying him time, but he did not know how much. He reached his ship just as the first of the armored figures appeared at the docking bay entrance. Maya was already at the controls, powering up the engines. "We need to leave now," Kevin shouted as he sealed the hatch behind him. The ship launched into space seconds before the attackers could reach them. Kevin watched through the rear sensors as Nexus Station grew smaller behind them. Explosions bloomed across the station's surface. Someone had decided that destroying the entire station was preferable to letting them escape with the truth. "Did you get it?" Maya asked. Kevin held up the data chip. "Enough to prove we were framed. The Velthari are behind this. They are trying to start a war." Maya's face went pale. "The Velthari have a seat on the Security Directorate. They have allies everywhere. Then we need to move fast." Kevin opened a secure channel to Earth before they can bury the truth forever. Behind them, Nexus Station burned. And somewhere in the shadows, powerful forces began to realize that their plan was falling apart. The data chip sat in the center of the table like a bomb waiting to explode. Around it sat the most powerful leaders on Earth, their faces showing various degrees of shock and anger as Captain Kevin Park finished his report. "The Velthari," Senator Duncan said slowly, as if testing how the word felt in his mouth. "They have been our trading partners for 80 years. They signed the Non-Aggression Compact, and now they are trying to destroy us," Admiral Holloway replied. Her voice was flat and cold. "The evidence is clear. They funded the attack on the Dravosi outpost. They manufactured the false evidence. They destroyed Nexus Station to cover their tracks. Can we prove it to the Council?" Kevin nodded. "The data chip contains financial records, communication logs, and testimony from captured syndicate operatives. It is not complete, but it is enough to raise serious questions about the Velthari's involvement." The room fell silent. Everyone understood what this meant. Proving Velthari guilt would not just clear humanity's name. It would expose a member of the Security Directorate as a criminal conspiracy. The political consequences would shake the entire galaxy. Daniel Carter's voice came through the communication screen mounted on the wall. He was still on Concordia Prime, still waiting for a chance to address the Council. "I can present the evidence," Daniel said. "I have requested a hearing 3 times, and 3 times I have been denied. But Council rules allow any member species to demand emergency session if they have proof of conspiracy against galactic peace. Will they listen?" Senator Duncan asked. "They will have to. The rules are clear. Once I present the evidence, the Council must investigate. They cannot simply vote it away." Admiral Holloway leaned forward. "There is another problem. The Velthari will know we are coming. The moment you request an emergency session, they will try to stop you. I am aware of the risk. Then you will not go alone." Holloway turned to face the screen directly. "I am sending an escort. Officially, they will be there to ensure your safety. Unofficially, they will be prepared for whatever the Velthari might try." The hearing was scheduled for 3 days later. Daniel spent those days preparing his presentation, reviewing every piece of evidence, and practicing what he would say. Lisa Monroe helped him organize the material into a clear and logical sequence. They both knew they would only get one chance. On the day of the hearing, the Grand Assembly Hall was more crowded than Daniel had ever seen it. Word had spread that the humans were returning with explosive claims. Representatives from every member species filled the seats, and thousands more watched through broadcast systems across the galaxy. Daniel walked to the central podium with Lisa by his side. He felt the weight of every eye upon him, the suspicion and hostility and curiosity all mixed together. He took a breath and began to speak.
3 weeks ago, I stood in this chamber and told you that humanity was innocent, he said.
You did not believe me. Today, I will show you the truth. The display screens around the chamber lit up with images and data. Financial records showing transfers from Velthury accounts to known syndicate intermediaries. Communication logs in which Velthury officials discussed the operation in coded language. Testimony from a captured syndicate operative who had been promised immunity in exchange for full cooperation. The attack on the Dravosi outpost was not committed by humans, Daniel continued. It was committed by mercenaries hired by the Velthury Confederation. The evidence you saw 3 weeks ago was manufactured to frame humanity. The goal was to start a war that would weaken both our peoples, leaving us vulnerable to Velthury expansion. A roar of voices filled the chamber. Some shouted in anger, others in disbelief. High Arbiter Vashkith raised his arms for silence, but it took several minutes before order was restored. When the noise finally died down, Coordinator Threshon of the Velthury delegation rose from his seat. He was a tall being with smooth blue skin and eyes that seemed to hold no emotion. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured. These accusations are absurd, he said. The humans are desperate to escape justice, so they have manufactured false evidence against a respected member of this council. We demand that these lies be rejected immediately. The evidence speaks for itself, Daniel replied. I invite any independent investigator to examine it. Evidence can be faked, as you yourself pointed out 3 weeks ago. Then let us investigate. Let us examine Velthury financial records. Let us question Velthury officials. If you are innocent, you have nothing to fear. Threshon's calm expression flickered for just a moment. It was brief, but Daniel saw it. Fear. The Dravosi representative, Commander Verthax, rose from his seat. His yellow eyes moved between Daniel and Threshon, weighing what he had heard. I came here seeking justice for my people, Verthax said slowly. I was told that humans killed our scientists. Now I am told that the Velthury may be responsible. He turned to face High Arbiter Vashkith. I demand an independent investigation. The truth must be found, regardless of where it leads. The chamber erupted again. This time, the voices were mostly in agreement. One by one, delegations began calling for an investigation. The Mullori, the Synthari, even species that had voted for sanctions against humanity now demanded answers. High Arbiter Vashkith raised his arms once more. The Council will recess to consider this matter. Pending investigation, all Velthury assets within Council space are hereby frozen. Coordinator Threshon, you are ordered to remain on this station until the investigation is complete. Threshon's face twisted with sudden fury. He said something in his own language that the translators did not process, then turned and walked quickly toward the exit. His entire delegation followed. Stop them, Vashkith ordered. Security forces moved to block the exits, but Threshon produced a small device from his robes and pressed a button. Explosions rocked the chamber. Emergency barriers slammed down across the exits. In the confusion, Threshon and his people vanished through a service corridor. Daniel grabbed Lisa and pulled her behind the podium as debris rained down around them. When the dust cleared, he looked up to see chaos. Injured delegates were being helped by medical teams. Security forces were rushing in every direction. And somewhere in the station, Threshon was running. He is heading for the docking bays, Lisa said, checking her tablet. His ship is still there. Daniel opened a channel to the human escort ships waiting outside the station.
This is Ambassador Carter.
Coordinator, Threshin is fleeing. He cannot be allowed to escape. Admiral Holloway's voice came back immediately. Understood. We are moving to intercept. Daniel looked around the damaged chamber. Despite everything, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. The truth was out. Now it was time to make sure justice followed. The message reached Earth 7 hours after Daniel Carter walked out of the assembly. It traveled through relay stations and communication buoys, crossing 300 light years in the time it took most people to eat breakfast. When it arrived at Earth's orbital command station, it set off alarms that had not been used in decades. Admiral Grace Holloway was in her office when the alert came through. She was a woman of 60 with iron gray hair cut short and a face that showed every battle she had ever fought. She read the message twice before setting down her coffee cup and reaching for the comm panel.
"Get me the Security Council," she said.
"All members. Emergency session. Now." Within the hour, the most powerful leaders on Earth were gathered in a sealed chamber deep beneath the orbital station. Senator Paul Duncan, chair of the Security Council, sat at the head of the table. He was a heavy-set man with thick glasses and a reputation for staying calm in crisis. Right now, his hands were shaking slightly as he read the report for the third time. "They voted for sanctions without even letting us speak," he said. "In 200 years of galactic diplomacy, this has never happened. The Dravosi have been looking for an excuse to move against us for decades," Admiral Holloway replied. "It seems they finally found one. An excuse they manufactured themselves? That remains to be seen." Holloway pulled up a display showing the evidence the Dravosi had presented. Ship signatures, hull fragments, communication logs. "I have ordered Captain Kevin Park to begin a full investigation. If this evidence is real, we need to know who is responsible. If it is fake, we need to prove it." Senator Duncan nodded slowly. "And in the meantime?"
"In the meantime, I am moving the Third Fleet to defensive positions along the border.
Not aggressive action, just readiness. If the Dravosi decide that sanctions are not enough, I want to be prepared." The meeting continued for 3 more hours. By the end, no one had any clear answers, only more questions. Who had attacked the Dravosi outpost? Why would anyone want to frame humanity? And what would happen if they could not prove their innocence? Across the galaxy, news of the human walkout spread like fire. Alien networks broadcast footage of Daniel Carter's speech, analyzing every word and gesture. Commentators debated what it meant. Some called it an admission of guilt. Others saw it as a desperate act of defiance. A few, speaking quietly and off the record, wondered if humanity might have been set up. On the Mallory homeworld, Ambassador Tessa watched the footage in her private chambers. She had known Daniel Carter for 15 years. They had shared meals together, celebrated holidays, and worked side by side on dozens of treaties. She did not believe he was capable of ordering the murder of innocent scientists, but she had not spoken in his defense at the assembly. She had remained silent, like all the others, because speaking up would have meant standing alone against the majority. Now, as she watched Daniel's face on the screen, she felt a shame that would stay with her for the rest of her life. Captain Kevin Park received his orders while stationed at a monitoring post near the edge of human space. He was a young man, barely 30, but his reputation for solving impossible problems had earned him the trust of Admiral Holloway herself. When he read the mission briefing, he understood why she had chosen him. "We need to get to that debris field," he told his team, "before anyone else has a chance to clean it up." His ship, a small scout vessel designed for speed and stealth, departed within the hour. The journey to the neutral zone would take 6 days. Kevin spent most of that time studying the evidence the Dravosi had presented, looking for anything that did not fit.
He found his first clue on the third day. The ship's signatures recorded at the attack site matched human vessels, but the pattern of engine output was wrong. Human ships used a specific fuel mixture that produced a distinctive energy signature. The signatures in the Dravosi evidence showed a slightly different mixture, one that had not been used by human vessels in over 30 years. Someone used old data, Kevin muttered to himself. They copied signatures from our historical records, not from our current fleet. It was not proof of innocence, but it was a start. Back on Earth, the first reports of new attacks began to arrive. A human mining colony in the fringe had been hit by unknown vessels. Survivors described ships bearing Dravosi markings, though no Dravosi fleet had been detected in the area. Another attack followed 3 days later, then another. Each time, the attackers vanished before human forces could respond. Admiral Holloway stared at the casualty reports with growing anger. 300 dead at the first colony, 500 at the second. The numbers kept climbing, and she could do nothing to stop them. "They are trying to provoke us," she said during a late-night meeting with Senator Duncan. "They want us to strike back so they can claim we are the aggressors. Can we prove the attacks are not coming from the Dravosi?" "Not yet, but I have people working on it." On Concordia Prime, the Assembly continued to meet without human participation. New proposals were discussed. New votes were taken. But beneath the normal business of galactic politics, tension was building. The Dravosi were demanding military action against Earth. Other species were urging caution. And everyone was watching, waiting to see what humanity would do next. Daniel Carter remained on the station, refusing to leave until he had a chance to clear his people's name. He spent his days gathering information, reaching out to contacts, and trying to find anyone who might be willing to listen. Most doors remained closed to him, but late one night, a message arrived on his personal device. It came from an unknown source, routed through a dozen relay points to hide its origin. The message contained only 3 words: "You were framed." Daniel stared at the screen for a long time. Then he forwarded the message to Captain Kevin Park and began to hope that maybe, just maybe, the truth would come out in time. 6 days after leaving Earth, Kevin's ship arrived at the debris field. What he found there would change everything. The Grand Assembly Hall of Concordia Prime was the largest room Daniel Carter had ever seen. The ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top. Thousands of seats curved around a central platform, where speakers addressed the gathered representatives of 47 spacefaring species. Light came from glowing panels that shifted color depending on which delegation held the floor. Right now, they glowed a soft blue for humanity. Daniel stood at the central podium, his voice calm and steady as he presented Earth's annual trade proposal. He was a tall man in his early 50s with gray hair at his temples and the kind of face that rarely showed emotion. 20 years of diplomatic service had taught him to keep his feelings hidden. His aide, Lisa Monroe, sat in the human section behind him, following along on her tablet and making notes. The proposal was routine. New shipping routes through the outer reach, reduced tariffs on medical supplies. Nothing controversial. Daniel expected the vote to pass without much discussion, and then he could return to Earth for his daughter's graduation. He was already thinking about the gift he would bring her when the interruption came. A harsh buzzing sound filled the chamber. The light shifted from blue to angry red. Daniel stopped speaking and looked up at the Arbiter's platform, where High Arbiter Vashkith sat on his throne of polished stone. The Kethrani was tall and thin, with a body like a praying mantis and eyes that reflected light like black mirrors. He raised one of his 4 arms, and the buzzing stopped. "The Dravosi delegation requests immediate recognition," Vashkith announced. His voice was translated by the chamber systems into something humans could understand. "They claim urgent matter of galactic security." Daniel frowned. The Dravosi were a reptilian species known for their military strength and their short tempers. They had never been friendly toward humanity, but they had also never been openly hostile. He stepped back from the podium as the Dravosi representative took his place. Commander Vathax was massive, standing nearly 8 feet tall, with scales the color of dried blood. His yellow eyes swept across the chamber before settling on the human delegation. When he spoke, his words came out in a growl that the translators struggled to process. 3 days ago, our research outpost in the neutral zone was destroyed, he said. 47 Dravosi scientists and support staff were killed. There were no survivors. A murmur spread through the chamber. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. He had heard nothing about this attack. No reports had reached Earth's diplomatic channels. Vathax continued. We have recovered evidence from the debris field. Ship signatures matching human vessels. Hull fragments bearing Earth markings. Communication logs showing human military codes. The murmur became a roar. Delegates from dozens of species turned to stare at the human section. Daniel saw fear in some eyes and anger in others. He also saw something else that troubled him more. He saw satisfaction on the faces of species who had always resented humanity's rapid rise in galactic politics. This is an act of war, Vathax declared. We demand justice from this council. High Arbiter Vashkith raised his arms for silence. Ambassador Carter, you may respond. Daniel walked back to the podium. His heart was beating fast, but his face remained calm. He had learned long ago that showing emotion in this chamber was a sign of weakness. High Arbiter, members of the council, he began. The human government has no knowledge of this attack. We have conducted no military operations in the neutral zone. We have no reason to attack Dravosi scientists. The evidence speaks otherwise. Vathax interrupted. Evidence can be manufactured, Daniel replied. Ship signatures can be copied. Hull fragments can be planted. I request time for an independent investigation before this council takes any action. The request was reasonable. It followed established council procedures. Daniel expected Vashkith to grant it without question. Instead, the High Arbiter looked down at him with those black mirror eyes and said nothing for a long moment. The evidence presented by the Dravosi is compelling, Vashkith finally said. The council will vote on immediate sanctions against Earth pending further review. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. Immediate sanctions meant frozen assets, suspended trade agreements, and travel restrictions. It would cripple Earth's economy within months. And the vote would happen now, before humanity could mount any defense. He looked around the chamber at the species who had called, themselves friends of humanity. The Vorten, who had signed a mutual defense treaty with Earth just 2 years ago. The Malori, whose medical technology had saved millions of human lives. The Centauri, whose ambassador had attended Daniel's own wedding. None of them would meet his eyes. None of them spoke in humanity's defense. The vote began. Species after species voted in favor of sanctions. A few abstained. None voted against. Daniel watched the numbers climb on the display above the Arbiter's platform. When the final count appeared, showing overwhelming support for the sanctions, he felt something cold settle in his chest. He looked at Lisa. She was pale, her hands gripping her tablet so hard that her knuckles had turned white. She gave him a small nod. Daniel turned back to the podium. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but the chamber's systems carried it to every ear. For 200 years, humanity has sought peace with the species of this galaxy, he said. We have opened our borders. We have shared our resources. We have sent our doctors to heal the sick and our engineers to build bridges between worlds. And this is how we are repaid. He paused, letting the silence stretch. You have condemned us without hearing our testimony. You have ignored our request for investigation.
You have chosen to believe the word of our accusers over any evidence we might present. This is not justice. This is theater. Rithak started to speak, but Daniel cut him off with a raised hand. The human delegation withdraws from these proceedings, Daniel announced. We will not participate in a mockery of the principles this council claims to uphold. When you are ready to conduct a fair investigation, you know where to find us. He stepped away from the podium and walked toward the exit. Lisa fell into step beside him, followed by the rest of the human delegation. Their footsteps echoed in the sudden silence of the chamber. Daniel pushed open the massive doors that led out of the assembly hall. As he stepped through, he heard the whispers starting behind him. Fear, confusion, and beneath it all, the first tremors of something that might have been regret. The doors sealed behind the human delegation with a sound like thunder. On the other side, 2,000 alien representatives sat frozen in their seats, staring at the empty space where humanity had stood. Just moments before High Arbiter Vashketh looked down at the closed doors for a long time. In all his centuries of service, no species had ever walked out of the Grand Assembly. He did not know what would happen next, but he knew one thing with terrible certainty. The galaxy had just changed forever.